A FedEx driver pulls into a quiet driveway in a rural area of Texas with a Christmas package in the back of the truck. Minutes later, a 7-year-old girl disappears. 2 days after that, the same driver is confessing that she is dead. And more than 3 years later, the courtroom is still trying to answer the question at the center of this case. Was this a desperate cover-up after an accident? Or was there something darker from the beginning? Stay with me. Because this is not just the story of a driver, a delivery, and a murder. It is the story of a child who should have been safe in her own driveway. A little girl described by those who knew her as a free spirit, a true gem. A child who loved drawing, coloring, writing, horses, makeup, bows, and stickers on her hands. A girl who never got to open the Barbie set that had been delivered for Christmas. And it is also the story of a killer who first said that everything had been a terrible accident, then pleaded guilty to capital murder, and still left a courtroom full of people arguing over what exactly was in his mind when he took her. Athena Presley Monroe Strand was born on May 23, 2015. Her parents, Jacob Strand and Maitland Gandhi, were no longer together when she died, but both remained central in her life. She lived mainly in Oklahoma with her mother, but because Maitland was facing serious health problems in 2022, Athena went for a time to Paradise, Texas, to stay with her father, his wife Ashley, and her siblings. That arrangement was supposed to be temporary. It was supposed to help. It was supposed to keep life stable while the adults dealt with adult problems. Instead, it placed Athena in the exact driveway from which she would be taken. The setting matters in this case. Paradise is not the kind of place people imagine when they think of a national child abduction story. It is a rural area, quiet, the kind of place where a truck coming down your road does not automatically seem threatening, the kind of place where children play outside, where neighbors know each other, and where the delivery of a package does not sound like danger. That is part of what made Athena's disappearance so terrifying. It destroyed the basic idea that familiar places and ordinary routines create enough safety on their own. On Wednesday, November 30th, 2022, Athena went to school like any other first-grade student. Her teacher, Lindsay Thompson, later testified that Athena was a free spirit who loved writing, drawing, and talking with friends. She still remembers Athena's last day in the classroom. The girl had talked too much that day, and Thompson sent a note home about it, but she wanted to end the day on a positive note. So she hugged Athena and said, "I love you, and tomorrow we'll have a better day." There was no tomorrow for Athena. That afternoon, Athena got off the school bus and returned to her father's property in Wise County. Jacob was on a hunting trip. Ashley was at home preparing dinner. Because the family's house was under renovation, Athena and her stepsister were sleeping in a converted storage shed next to the house. Athena was supposed to be sorting clothes for the laundry while Ashley cooked. Instead, at some point between the end of school and dinner, she disappeared. Ashley first thought Athena might be hiding or playing somewhere on the property. Then she started checking with relatives who lived nearby. Then panic set in. Shortly before 7 p.m., the authorities were already at the house. At first, this looked like every parent's worst nightmare and the hardest type of case for any investigator. A child missing from a rural property with very few clues in the first hours. Volunteers arrived. The police arrived. The FBI got involved quickly. Temperatures were dropping and time was crucial. But one of the most important failures of the initial response had nothing to do with lack of effort. It had to do with alert criteria. Police could not immediately issue an Amber Alert because there was still no confirmation of an abduction. Athena's alert was only issued shortly after 5 p.m. on December 1st, approximately 24 hours after she had officially been reported missing. That delay would later inspire a change in Texas law. And in one of the most devastating ironies of any recent child murder case, the thing that opened up the investigation was the Christmas gift Athena never got to open. And a FedEx package had been delivered to the Strand property at approximately the same time Athena disappeared. Inside it was a set of Barbie dolls from the You Can Be Anything line, a gift Ashley had bought for her. Investigators traced that delivery, discovered that it had been made by a company contracted by FedEx called Big Topspin, and then discovered that the delivery truck was equipped with cameras operated by a third-party vendor. When investigators obtained that footage, they saw something that immediately changed the case from a missing child search into a targeted homicide investigation. The driver had placed inside the truck a girl who matched Athena. The driver was Tanner Lynn Horner. He was 31 years old at the time Athena was killed, and 34 when he appeared in a Tarrant County courtroom in April 2026 and pleaded guilty. He was not a direct FedEx employee, but a third-party driver making deliveries in the area. Investigators would later present evidence that he had been on the same road the day before Athena disappeared. A fact prosecutors used to argue that what happened on November 30th was not an isolated coincidence of timing and opportunity, but part of a pattern of observation and opportunity. In 2026, the defense would portray Horner as a man with profound developmental and mental health problems. Prosecutors portrayed him as a manipulative liar who kept adjusting his version whenever the evidence cornered him. Both things may be true in different ways. But only one thing is beyond any dispute now. He is the man who took Athena. When authorities found him and began questioning him in December 2022, Horner presented the version of events that dominated public discussion for years. He said he had accidentally hit Athena with the delivery truck while backing out of the driveway. He said she was not seriously injured. He said he panicked because she said she would tell her father what had happened. He said he put her in the van, tried to break her neck, failed, and then strangled her. He also led investigators to her body, although according to reporting and court records, only after first giving them misleading information about the location. That confession formed the backbone of the case long before a jury heard any evidence at trial. But when the sentencing phase of the trial began in April 2026, prosecutors no longer treated that explanation as the truth. They treated it as the first of many lies. They told jurors that the only consistent truth Horner had told was that he killed Athena. They argued that the story of "I hit her and panicked" was a cover story, built to sound like fear instead of predation, like a catastrophe of seconds instead of a chosen crime. And the most powerful piece of evidence they had to support that argument was a single black and white image from inside the truck. Athena standing up, alive, alert, and visibly without serious injuries in the cargo area after Horner had already put her in there. If she had been crushed or incapacitated in the driveway, that image should not exist. But it does. That image changed the entire emotional structure of the case, because it means Athena was not just a child trapped in the consequences of a mistake with a vehicle. She was a child who was alive, conscious, frightened, and trying to understand what was happening while she was being taken deeper into the truck by a man who then threatened her. Jurors heard that one of the first things Horner said to her inside the vehicle was essentially a warning not to scream, or he would hurt her. Athena, trying to understand the danger, asked, "Are you a kidnapper?" She asked, "Where are we going?" He answered that it did not matter. Then he covered the camera. The audio kept recording. What happened next is some of the hardest evidence ever presented in a modern capital case. According to reporters who remained in the courtroom when public playback was limited, jurors heard Athena crying, resisting, clearly in pain, and fighting. Prosecutors said she was a warrior and that she fought with everything she had against an adult man weighing approximately 250 pounds. The audio captured Horner talking to her, asking how old she was, asking about school, saying that she was pretty, and at a certain point, according to courtroom coverage, telling her to take off her shirt. She refused and called for her mother. At some point after that, the evidence showed a prolonged assault inside the truck. The medical examiner later testified that Athena died as a result of blunt force injuries, smothering, and strangulation, and that, in her opinion, Athena suffered. That medical testimony is crucial because it expanded the case beyond the initial confession. For years, the public narrative was that Horner strangled Athena after hitting her, but in court the evidence was more complex and more brutal. Dr. Jessica Dwyer testified that Athena's cause of death was not just strangulation. It was the combination of blunt force trauma, smothering, and strangulation. Fox 4 also reported that a forensic analyst testified that male DNA was found in samples from Athena's sexual assault kit, and that semen and blood were detected on Horner's clothing. At the same time, the medical examiner said that the absence of visible physical trauma in some areas did not rule out sexual assault. That is an important distinction. It means that the evidence presented in court raised serious implications of sexual violence, although the formal public structure of the case remained centered on capital murder and aggravated kidnapping. Athena's body was found on December 2, 2022, about 9 miles from her home, near the Trinity River in the Boyd area. She had been missing for 2 days. Court reporting later indicated that she was found without clothes, and that investigators recovered articles of clothing believed to be hers. CBS Texas reported that when investigators questioned Horner about why Athena's clothes had been removed, he allegedly said it was for humiliation and because he thought it was funny. Even in a case already filled with horror, that detail stands out because of what it reveals. Cruelty added to murder, not as panic, but as domination. And then there was the behavior after the crime. The evidence presented during the sentencing phase showed that after killing Athena, Horner returned to the same route and passed through the search area again, while volunteers and police were already looking for her. A woman told him that a 7-year-old child had been kidnapped, and he answered, "Are you serious?" It is the kind of detail prosecutors love, because it looks like performance, shock as theater, not as truth. Investigators also presented phone and digital evidence, showing that Horner later searched terms like "missing girl in paradise" and "do FedEx truck cameras record all the time?" If the original story was panic, the search history looked much more like later calculation. The arrest came quickly. In early December 2022, Horner was charged with capital murder and aggravated kidnapping. Texas law immediately turned this into one of the most serious types of homicide charge, because the victim was under 10 years old. Prosecutors made it clear from the beginning that they intended to seek the death penalty. At first, Horner pleaded not guilty. The case then followed the usual slow mechanism of a capital prosecution. Defense disputes, delays, pre-trial hearings, venue issues, and years of waiting until a court would finally hear the case. Because of the publicity and the intensity of local feeling in Wise County, the case ended up being transferred to neighboring Tarrant County. Athena's death also changed Texas law. Because the first Amber Alert was delayed while investigators were trying to confirm whether an abduction had occurred, lawmakers created a more flexible local alert system. House Bill 3556, signed in June 2023 and commonly called the Athena Alert, allows Texas authorities to issue local alerts for missing children within a 100-mile radius and in adjacent counties, without having to first meet all the statewide Amber Alert criteria. The law's own legislative analysis directly references Athena Strand and states that, according to police, the driver kidnapped and murdered her to avoid getting into trouble or being reported to her parents. In other words, even before the end of the trial, Athena's case had already changed the way Texas responds when a child disappears under suspicious circumstances. There was also civil litigation. In December 2022, Jacob Strand sued Horner, FedEx, and Big Topspin, alleging negligent hiring and failure to properly investigate Horner's criminal, mental health, and employment history. Maitland Gandhi filed her own wrongful death action in early 2023, likewise arguing that the companies failed in the way they hired, trained, and supervised him. These lawsuits became part of a broader public debate over the degree of responsibility that large delivery networks and their subcontractors assume when they put drivers on residential routes. Recent reporting by People says that those civil actions were later dismissed in 2023, but the central question never really disappeared. How much screening should be required before someone is given routine access to family homes, driveways, and children? On April 7, 2026, the criminal case took a turn no one expected that morning. Instead of forcing the state to prove every element of the charges before the jury, Tanner Horner stood up in a Tarrant County courtroom and pleaded guilty to capital murder and aggravated kidnapping. That ended the guilt-innocence phase before it truly began, and turned the proceeding into a trial only about the sentence. From that point on, the jury's only role was to decide whether Horner would be sentenced to death or to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. The guilty plea did not bring a quiet end to the case. In some respects, it made the next phase even more intense, because all the evidence kept coming into court, only now for sentencing purposes. That sentencing phase exposed not only the crime, but also the way Horner kept reshaping the story even after admitting guilt. CBS Texas reported that jurors heard evidence that Horner referred to an alter ego named Zero, blamed Zero for the murder, described the events as something like a dream, and at one point tried to negotiate an ankle monitor and one last Christmas with his family in exchange for telling the truth. He also left letters in jail after a suicide attempt. One letter to Athena's family was full of apologies and self-pity, blaming his unstable mental state and changes in work routes. Another letter to detectives described a completely different and fantastical version of events, alleging that an older armed man forced him to take Athena and later return the body to the water. These letters do not show only instability. They show someone still trying, years later, to fragment responsibility into versions that make him less central to what he did. During the sentencing phase, prosecutors also presented the testimony of two women who said Horner sexually assaulted them when they were teenagers, years before Athena's murder. One said she was 16 in 2013, when Horner assaulted her twice after she had consumed alcohol. Another said he assaulted her while she was sleeping after a gathering. Both testified that they only went to police after Horner was arrested in Athena's case. According to People, Horner has now also been indicted in Tarrant County for sexual assault of a child related to those allegations. These accusations are separate from Athena's case, but prosecutors used those testimonies to argue future dangerousness and support the death penalty. The defense, in turn, went in the opposite direction. Instead of denying the murder, defense attorneys tried to humanize Horner and argue that his life story should spare him from execution. On April 20, 2026, 4 defense experts had testified outside the presence of the jury that Horner had autism, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, severe childhood lead intoxication, serious developmental problems, and evidence of head trauma. One expert said that his childhood lead levels were 24 times higher than normal for people his age. The defense also argued that Horner had been facing serious mental health problems long before Athena's death. But there was an important limit even there. According to CBS Texas, one of the defense psychologists also stated that Horner understood the difference between right and wrong. Therefore, whatever mitigating effect the defense may eventually obtain from those experts, this is not an insanity case. And that was where the case stood on April 21, 2026. The question of guilt was already closed because Horner had pleaded guilty. The question of punishment was still open. The jury had not yet returned a sentence. On April 20th, CBS Texas and NBC-DFW reported that the proceeding had temporarily continued outside the presence of the jury so that the court could evaluate the defense experts before they testified in front of jurors. Prosecutors were still seeking death. The defense was still fighting for life in prison without parole. So the case had reached the most decisive point possible without yet reaching final legal closure. In the middle of all this, Athena's family kept bringing the courtroom back to what this case really means. Jacob Strand testified that one of his favorite memories was finding Athena filling a horse trough so she could play at swimming with her Barbies in it, wearing a dress and cowgirl boots. He also testified that, after her death, he stopped eating, started drinking, lost a great deal of weight, and watched the emotional structure of the family collapse under grief. Maitland Gandhi testified about the last thing she said to Athena. "I love you and I'll see you on Friday," and about the moment she found out her daughter had died. She said that if the story of the accidental impact had been true, they could have forgiven that, because accidents happen. But he chose to do more, and that choice is what she has never stopped naming. She also said something that may be the clearest moral statement in the entire case. If she could sit in front of him, she said she would tell him that he is nothing, and Athena is everything. That line matters because it refuses to allow the killer to become the center of the story. Even in a death penalty trial, built around his psychology, his health history, his lies, his letters, his search history, and his future dangerousness. Maitland's answer pulls the story back to where it belongs, to a little girl who liked bows, stickers, drawings, horses, and Barbie dolls. To a 7-year-old child who should be remembered first as a child, not as evidence. And that is the hardest truth of this case. Athena Strand should be alive right now. She should be older now, more talkative now, taller now. She should have opened those Barbies on Christmas morning. She should have gone through all the ordinary stages of childhood, the ones children go through when they are allowed to keep being children. Instead, her life was reduced in court to camera footage, forensic testimony, search history records, autopsy findings, and arguments over whether the man who killed her deserves death or only permanent incarceration. Those arguments matter legally. They matter enormously. But they are not the heart of the loss. The heart of the loss is that a child who could have become anything was stolen before she had the chance to become anything at all. So, if there is a correct way to remember Athena Strand, it is not only as the little girl in the truck image, or as the little girl whose case changed alert law in Texas, or as the little girl whose killer pleaded guilty at the last moment. Remember her as the child her teacher described, a free spirit, a true gem, a little girl full of life, a child who deserved a tomorrow. And if there is a way to understand Tanner Horner, it is this: whatever his mental health history, developmental damage, work route stress, or mitigating factor the defense may present, none of that changes the central fact that has now been admitted in court. He took Athena Strand. He killed her. And to this day, a Texas jury was still being asked to decide how the law should answer for that. Thank you to everyone who watched this video. We truly hope this story mattered to you. And if you'd like to support the channel and help us continue creating content, please like the video, leave a comment, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Your support really makes a difference, and we genuinely appreciate every person who helps keep these stories from being forgotten.